Well, Mehari, thank you so much for joining us today. And let me briefly introduce you before we dive in. So Mehari Korcho is originally from Ethiopia and is now serving God in the US with One Challenge International and Near Frontiers. And Mehari, can you share a little bit about the focus of your ministry more specifically?
Yes, the focus of my ministry is actually to work with diaspora churches to mobilize and equip them for global missions, basically. So I do believe that there is a potential among the diaspora community for missions. So that's my passion.
Okay, so let's talk about some relevant issues in diaspora church ministry. You've worked with and researched this in this area for several years, and so I'm so happy that you can share your perspective with us. So let's start with this. What's the difference between a first-generation immigrant and a second-generation immigrant, and kind of why does that distinction matter?
Most of the time, actually, people don't realize the context of diaspora community in its entire context, which is there is a generational dynamics and also there is a cultural dynamics within the diaspora community. Even within a given family migrant, there is this dynamics of generational dynamics and also cultural dynamics. When we actually divide it like into three groups, which is the first generation, 1.5 generation, and the second generation. So the first generation refers to the parents' generation. We call them first generation just because they arrived first to the country of destination. So they are the first one to migrate to the country of destination. And culturally, they have this strong attachment with their home culture. So they have this, cultural attachment with actually very strong cultural attachment with their home culture than the hosting culture. When it comes to second generation refers to immigrants, immigrant children actually who were migrated at an early age or born and raised in the country of destination. So they are culturally attached with the hosting culture, basically. So if they're born and raised in America, then they reflect more of the American culture. So that's basically the difference between the first generation and the second generation. Second generation are immigrant children who born and raised in the country of destination and culturally attached with the hosting culture. When it comes to the 1.5 generation, 1.5 generation refers to a generation between the two, actually the first and second generation. They are young adults who came to the hosting culture or to the hosting country in their young age. So culturally, they have a good grasp of both cultures, actually, both the country of destination and also their home culture. So basically, that's the difference between the three, generational circles of diaspora community.
Okay, yeah, that's a really helpful distinction. What would you say, how do those generational differences make church ministry uniquely complex in diaspora churches? And maybe what are some of the unique challenges?
Well, it's very much challenging actually to have a church for a diaspora community because like they are living in a different context. And because of the context that they are living in, it's I mean, with this generational dynamics, with this cultural dynamics, it is challenging for them actually to have a church in a kind of different context that fits to all.
Yeah.
So, well, generational dynamics cannot make it a kind of unique challenge because you can get that generational dynamics in every churches. But what makes it unique in terms of the challenge that they are facing is that like the cultural difference, the cultural gap that they have. When we talk about culture, we're talking about language, we're talking about mindset, we're talking about lifestyle. So, for example, language, there is a language barrier, particularly between the first and second generation. So, for example, I came from Ethiopia. I'm living in the US, and my kids are, I'm just giving example actually. So, the kids are speaking English, but then I am speaking Amharic. So there's a challenge in that, like especially how I can communicate with them if I'm not fluent enough to communicate with my kids. So the same is true in the church. In the church, they cannot sit together in the same sanctuary to have the service together because of the language barrier. So one of the challenges is the language problem. The other challenge is the mindset, which is a place where we grow up has a huge impact in shaping our worldview, in shaping our perspectives, understanding, thinking. It's all shaped by the place where we grow up first. So the first generation, even the 1.5 generation who are Amharic speakers in the Ethiopian case, they more understand the Ethiopian culture, and the way they see things is from that lens. But for the second generation who grow up for example, in the States, they see things from the hosting culture perspective. So just to give you an example of mindset difference, for example, an immigrant who came from Ethiopia has this Ethiopian perspective, which is a kind of we have a communal culture, for example. But for their children who grow up in the States, they have individualistic kind of culture or viewpoint. So they don't understand why their action is connected with their family.
Right.
Does that make sense? So, yes. So there is a huge difference in this mind, how they think, how they perceive things, how they, in general, their worldview is different. And also, when we talk about cultural difference, we're talking about lifestyle difference. It refers to the way we dress, the way, the food we eat, the songs we listen to. So there is a lifestyle difference as well. So with that, I think it makes it, especially the cultural difference, makes it so challenging to minister to the second generation, and second generation benefiting the first generation as well. I mean, like to come together and to really serve the Lord together, worship the Lord together, to do all these things is really challenging because of the cultural barrier.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, great examples that you shared, but I know that you are also involved in addressing these challenges, these very real challenges. So I'd love you to finish up by just sharing with us from your experience, what would you suggest for diaspora churches moving forward, and how can they be unified in their fellowship, in their outreach, kind of having that unity and diversity? What have you found to be helpful?
I think it's all generations and churches in the hosting culture need to learn how to convert the challenges into opportunities. It's challenging for example, coming back to the second generation. It's challenging for the second generation to grow up between two cultures. But then it's good if they can perceive it, if they can take it as an opportunity and a privilege to actually describe themselves in different ways.
Yeah.
So, I mean, most people don't get this privilege, but they have it. I mean, it's instead of seeing it as a curse, they should see it as a blessing, because no one can get this privilege of expressing himself in many ways. Actually, at least they can express themselves from their parents' culture and the hosting culture, and also they are friends. They are friended with other people from other backgrounds as well.
Yeah.
So if they could learn as much as possible with I mean, from all the opportunities presented, then they can. That's a huge privilege. Actually, they can turn their challenge into opportunities. Especially in this globalized world, they can be best fit for missions in that sense.